Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today I'm here to make a theory on the fire arrow itself that's used directly by Sukuna. You know, the majestic arrow that has managed to capture the hearts of many fans. The same thing I modeled the entire channel after, because originally, and I think still to this day, my channel banner art is literally Sukuna using the fire arrow. And, well, despite the fact that we've only really seen this technique 2 separate times, there has been a lot of intrigue around this technique, whether this technique belongs to Sukuna directly or Yuji Itadori, whether Sukuna copied the technique directly from Jogo and watching Jogo's flames, or if he's always had access to it, and how it even functions in Jujutsu Kaisen, purely because of the fact it really doesn't fit alongside Sukuna having cleave and dismantle, what we've all assumed was his curse technique. So today, I actually got a few theories around the fire arrow, how it functions, and all of that good jazz, because we're on break week, so might as well cover how the fire arrow functions, and yeah, let's get straight into this. Now, I started to think a little bit more about the fire arrow when we recently saw Kusakabe state directly and question why Sukuna has yet to use the fire arrow yet. So, I created 2 theories around this, why Sukuna hasn't used the fire arrow yet, one revolving completely around Yuji Itadori, and the other revolving around Sukuna himself. So I'm going to get into the Sukuna one first, mainly because that's a more interesting one to talk about in my opinion, and I think that's an easier one to explain. So let's get straight to the Sukuna one. So basically, to summarize this entire theory and this entire idea, the same way that Sukuna was able to create the fire arrow is also how he created the space dismantle. Now that's a lot, so let me actually get into explaining that and why that makes sense and my logic for it. In Jujutsu Kaisen, we know the data about a curse technique is directly stored inside of the brain, especially where the black box is. And Sukuna knows quite a bit about the black box and how it functions. It was Sukuna who directly explained to Gojo of what was going wrong and why Gojo was bleeding at the domain clash and at the end of the domain clash, and how Gojo overhealed his brain and strained himself trying to heal his exhausted innate technique using reverse curse technique. Now this is going to be one of the main basis points of the entire theory. The fact that it is possible for cursed energy to directly interact with the black box of the brain where the curse technique is stored. Now we're going to go all the way back to when Sukuna fired off the flame arrow at Jogo and what he originally said to Jogo in that fight. In the conversation right before Sukuna fires the fire arrow, he says something that's extremely interesting to Jogo, which what he specifically says is this, that he expected him to know about this, but then he realized a cursed spirit wouldn't actually have a way to know about this. And when I was doing some rereading, I think I came to the answer of why Jogo wouldn't know about this, and that is because of the slight difference between Jogo and Sukuna. Cursed spirits do not innately have a black box, or at least they're more than likely just completely the black box. This is due to the fact that cursed spirits are just completely made of cursed energy, and that is kind of their form and shape. Therefore, they would not have a black box, or their black box would be written all over their body itself. Man, this sounds so weird out of context. Why am I realizing this now? Anyways, so basically what I'm trying to imply here is Sukuna made an edit to his black box in order to copy Jogo's technique, or how Jogo's technique functions, into a moldable flame for his own usage. The fire arrow used to be Jogo's technique, but now it is his own, which is why he is surprised that Jogo doesn't recognize it, because Jogo has no way to know it is his own black box. This is even more supported by the fact that Sukuna is shown the capability of being able to see a technique and its application once and be able to transfer it and apply it to his own technique in the process, as he directly did with Mahoraga's attack when Mahoraga had finished adapting to cleave and dismantle, and Sukuna directly described Mahoraga as a model for him on how to base his cleave and dismantle in order to bypass infinity. However, this first theory implies at least the reason that Sukuna is no longer able to use the fire arrow is because he sacrificed the ability to use the fire arrow for the creation of the space dismantle, because he will only be able to have one edit of his technique active at a time. So instead of basically adding on new things to his techniques, he is rewriting parts of his black box and his brain in order to perform applications of his technique based on other things he had seen in the past and other techniques he had seen used against him. For example, he specifically chose to use Jogo's flames against him because of the fact he wanted to challenge Jogo in a game of his own element, and he saw Mahoraga use the space dismantle, so he decided to add the space dismantle onto himself. Yes, I know Mahoraga didn't actually use dismantle, he just used the cursed energy slash, it's the same point, you get it. However, there are some, or more so only one issue with this theory directly, which is the fact that each time Sukuna used the fire arrow, he had to directly say open. However, that's not the case with the space dismantle, so this might be a little bit at drawing at straws. There is also the possibility that Sukuna is just using the same method to create the space dismantle. However, because it's based on his own original curse technique rather than creating a new curse technique like he did with Jogo's fire arrow, he was able to do it without the need to say open. But I wanted to put this theory out there. However, there is a second theory I have directly for this that is very similar. Now remember everything I just said about editing the black box. Well, what if it's not Sukuna's black box that was the one being edited in that very moment? What if the black box that was actually being edited in that moment belonged to Yuji Itadori directly instead? Now, we know something very interesting about Yuji Itadori, which is the fact that he has no curse technique to begin with. If he did, he would have shown up by this point, and it would have shown up in the Higuruma judge trial. He does not have an innate curse technique that we know about. Now in this theory I would like to talk about this, which is the fact that Sukuna might have rewritten Yuji's black box to be that from an empty black box into that of the fire arrow, the fire curse technique of Jogo himself, in order for him to use directly in battle and fire off the fire arrow at the Mahoraga, as well as at Jogo. Furthermore, it would also fit for why Kenjaku even created Yuji Itadori in order to be the perfect vessel of Sukuna. Not just does Yuji have an innately incredibly physically strong body, mainly because of the potency of his soul, since the body follows along in the shape of the soul, but on top of that, Yuji does not have a curse technique, which gives Sukuna something he can freely play around with, something Sukuna can freely edit the black box of in order to give it his own curse techniques, such as with the fire arrow. However, that is not the case with every single potential vessel he could have. For example, with Megumi Fushiguro, once he has Megumi, he can't really edit the black box anymore to create his own curse technique, at risk that he might potentially lose 10 shadows, or the existence of pre-existing data might make it even more difficult to edit. However, a blank canvas is going to be much easier to edit, much easier to write the code in for creating his own curse technique once he gets a model and a canvas in order for him to paint inside of his own black box. This would also make Yuji Itadori the perfect vessel to coexist alongside Sukuna, as Kenjaku intended for Yuji to be. Yuji has no curse technique and has an incredibly physically strong body. However, Sukuna knows how to manipulate curse energy and how to rewrite the black box, which effectively gives him an empty slot in an empty space which he can rewrite to place curse techniques into for him to continue to use, evolve, and adapt, in comparison to other people who have set black boxes and set limits, being 3 to 4 curse techniques as directly stated by Yuki Tsukumo. Yuji is basically being used as an external storage, similar to that of Rika and Yuta's relationship. Now there is some issues with this theory. The main one I can see being the issue with both of these theories is just, did Sukuna always have the fire arrow? However, I actually lean closer to no, Sukuna not always having the fire arrow, mainly because of something that was directly stated in the data book that I find extremely interesting that I want to talk about now. In the data book, it's directly asked, how much do human beings know about Sukuna's curse technique? Where the answer was, if they did their reading, they should be able to figure out some details about his slashing technique. It's possible they don't have any idea about the flames. Now, at least to me, this kinda implies he didn't always have the fire arrow, mainly because of the simple fact of, how are you going to just hide how big the fire arrow is from history and hide that away, considering the fact we know how massive of a range the fire arrow has when it was used against Mahoraga. Furthermore, with the emphasis that Jogo should recognize the technique and the fact that we know Jogo is not 1,000 years old, I think it actually makes more sense that the reason that Jogo would recognize the technique is actually because it was his own technique, and that is why Sukuna would think he would recognize the technique. But then he remembered that because he's a cursed spirit, he does not technically have a black box. So it would make sense why Jogo's not able to recognize the details and pattern of his own technique. Now, does this mean that Sukuna is able to limitlessly copy a curse technique? More than likely not. There's more than likely some limitations on it, some limits on what he can and can't copy that I could imagine. Something like he has to see the full capabilities of the curse technique for him to rewrite the black box into being able to do that and create his own based on it. Either that, or he has to be able to understand it, or it has to be a simple concept of it. I don't really know yet, but I do believe that Sukuna is able to rewrite the black box, and the fire arrow is a rewritten black box of Jogo's curse technique in order to create the fire arrow. All of this is basically to say this: Yuji more than likely has access to the fire arrow innately and not Sukuna anymore, because that was the last technique written on the black box. But more importantly, if Yuji figures out how to manipulate the black box, he will be able to create several techniques using the black box, or at least simulations of the curse techniques, because he has an empty black box that can be rewritten, and using Sukuna as a teacher for that if he remembers how to do it. So basically, Yuji should still have the rewritten data of the fire arrow if it was his black box being rewritten and not Sukuna's directly in order to use the fire arrow. Furthermore, it would make a lot more sense if it actually was Yuji's black box, because we do know Sukuna is capable of using Cleave and Dismantle as well as the fire arrow at the same time, unless Sukuna has a second black box, which I also really doubt. However, that's just my theory on the fire arrow and why it hasn't been used yet, and watch next chapter just completely and absolutely debunk this theory by having Sukuna use the fire arrow again on Yuji Itadori. Anyway, I'm Eternal Flame, I'm signing off, hope you all have a good day, see y'all later.